Imagine taking the sleek, perfectly engineered chassis of a vintage sports car and just trying to squish it into the shape of a bowling ball.
Oh, boy.
Right, and doing that without actually removing the engine. So the engine block, the radiator, the transmission, all of it is just forced into like a fraction of the space it was originally designed to occupy.
That sounds like an absolute disaster waiting to happen.
It really is. And I mean, that biological car crash is exactly what is happening in the aquarium trade right now.
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
So today, we are exploring a really highly specific but super revealing piece of source material. It's a blog post from August 18th, 2026,
Right.
from a site called Notes-on-Fishkeeping. Specifically, we're looking at part 321, which was authored by Ang.
And it's a fascinating read.
It really is. Our mission today is to examine this really complex intersection of aesthetics, genetics, and animal welfare. And we're using the Pearl Gourami as our main case study.
Which is such a perfect example for this.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because even if you, the listener, have literally never owned a fish tank in your life, the underlying mechanics of selective breeding and the real physiological cost of chasing a specific look, it's going to fundamentally change how you view the engineered world around you.
I completely agree. It is a phenomenal microcosm for the broader impacts of human intervention in natural systems.
Totally.
In this relatively short dispatch, Ang manages to highlight the really severe physiological realities that emerge when, human market demands just violently collide with millions of years of evolutionary biomechanics.
Yeah, and to really understand the manipulation, we have to first establish the baseline. Like, we need to look at the raw material before it gets warped.
Right, before the tinkering begins.
Exactly. So the author focuses on the standard Pearl Gourami, which is scientifically known as Trichopodus leerii. And N points out right away that this fish is already like one of the most popular and delightful species in the entire aquarium trade.
And that's entirely based on its naturally occurring traits, right?
Just as nature made it.
What's fascinating here is how that baseline popularity is really built on a foundation of evolutionary perfection.
Yeah.
The author notes its appeal comes from its naturally short and slim body shape, which is covered in these stunning iridescent pearl-like spots.
Hence the name.
Exactly. But that slim profile, it isn't just for show. In their natural habitat, in the really dense, vegetation-heavy swamps of Southeast Asia, that narrow, streamlined chassis allows them to weave effortlessly through tightly packed plant life.
So it's totally functional.
Oh, completely. The body shape is a highly specific hydrodynamic solution to their exact environment.
So the natural fish basically serves as the baseline of nature's design. It's
Yeah.
kind of like looking at that perfectly tuned vintage classic car I mentioned earlier.
Right, right.
The suspension is calibrated for its exact weight. The engine size perfectly matches the frame. It just operates flawlessly.
It's a complete working system.
Right. So the immediate question that comes to mind is, if you have a perfectly functioning, incredibly popular classic car, why the sudden urge to, pop the hood, tinker with the genetic engine, and completely warp a chassis that already works so well?
Well, that urge is really driven by the relentless market demand for novelty.
Just needing something new.
Yeah. A naturally beautiful organism is a great baseline, sure, but eventually the aesthetic standard sort of saturates the market. Everyone has one.
I see.
So to maintain consumer interest and to, frankly, command premium prices, breeders push for the unique or the bizarre or just the extreme.
Right.
The highly adapted natural blueprint is no longer respected as a complete system. It basically becomes a blank canvas to be aggressively painted over through genetic manipulation.
And that painting over process, that leads us to the first major deviation that Eng discusses in the text, which is the balloon Pearl Gourami.
Right, the balloon variety.
Just the word balloon alone signals a massive departure from that naturally short and slim baseline. I mean, we're talking about an inflated, compacted, almost spherical profile.
Yeah, and the underlying mechanism required to achieve that balloon mutation is biologically severe.
How so?
Well, breeders aren't just selecting for a slightly chubbier fish with a bit more fat tissue. They are intentionally amplifying a profound skeletal deformity.
Wait, really? A skeletal deformity?
Yes, it's essentially a really severe form of spinal lordosis or kyphosis. They are actively selecting for a compacted, heavily curved spine to force that shortened, rounded silhouette.
That sounds incredibly painful. And the author, Ang, explicitly pushes back on this. They state outright in the post I'm quoting here, "I am not really a fan of such breeding practices that push for extreme body shape mutations."
And you can see why.
Yeah, and they ground that opinion not just in personal aesthetic taste, but in structural mechanics. Because when you dramatically shorten and curve a spine, you are drastically reducing the internal volume of the skeletal cavity.
Exactly. But the biological reality is that the internal organs, the liver, the stomach, the intestines, the labyrinth organ they use to breathe air, they do not proportionally shrink to match the new bone structure.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you have a standard volume of complex internal organs being forced into a significantly smaller, totally altered cavity. They are literally squished.
Okay, going back to our car analogy,
Yes.
it's the biological equivalent of trying to shove a massive V8 engine and a full-size radiator into the tiny trunk of a smart car.
That is exactly what it's like.
I mean, the parts might technically fit if you just crush them together,
Yeah.
but the heat displacement is going to be an absolute nightmare and the belts are going to snap.
Yep.
In a living fish, this extreme spatial constraint has to severely impact basic physiological functions.
It compromises almost every internal system. Digestion becomes really strained, but perhaps most critically for a fish, buoyancy regulation is just destroyed.
Because of the swim bladder.
Precisely. Fish rely on a specialized organ called a swim bladder, which is a gas-filled sac that inflates and deflates to maintain neutral buoyancy in the water column.
Right.
When the spinal column is severely compacted into a balloon shape, that swim bladder is often pinched or deformed, or it's just unable to expand properly.
So the fish basically spends its entire life physically fighting just to stay level in the water.
Yeah, it never really gets a break. The biological causality here is inescapable. When breeders prioritize an extreme exterior shape over evolutionary logic, they inevitably degrade the interior structural integrity.
It's just a given.
The animal's internal architecture is fundamentally compromised just for the sake of a unique visual silhouette.
And that underlying structural compromise sets the stage perfectly for Eng's main discovery in this post. Because they didn't write Part 321 just to rehash critiques of the balloon gourami.
No, there was breaking news, so to speak.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. They wrote it because they stumbled onto a brand new extreme, the XL Pearl Gourami, a giant variety.
Yeah, and if the balloon gourami is an exercise in unnatural biological compression, the XL is an exercise in unnatural biological expansion.
Which comes with its own set of problems.
Exactly. Eng provides photos in the original post showing a variety that has been pushed far beyond the standard dimensions of that naturally slim baseline.
But, scaling up biology isn't as simple as just zooming in on a photograph.
Not at all.
It makes me think about hardware and software compatibility. It's kind of like trying to run a massive, brand new smartphone operating system on the hardware of a 10-year-old flip phone.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
The hardware, like the skeleton and the ligaments, it just wasn't built to process the massive load of the new software, so the whole system just glitches out.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it, especially when looking at Eng's specific physical observations of this XL fish.
Because Eng actually saw these in person, right?
Yeah. And upon close inspection, Eng notes two glaring realities: bodily deformation and awkward movement.
Okay, the bodily deformation makes sense if the growth is uneven or if it's forced too rapidly. But let's look closer at that awkward movement.
Okay.
Let me pose a theory here. We know that when a Great Dane puppy is growing, it goes through a phase where its paws are massive, its legs are gangly, and it constantly trips over itself.
Right, the puppy phase.
Is it possible that the awkward movement Eng observed is just an awkward teenager phase for a newly developed fish variety? Like, could the biology just need a few more generations to catch up?
It's a fair question. While developmental awkwardness is a real phenomenon, Eng's conclusion leans heavily toward a permanent fundamental flaw in the organism's design.
Really? So it's not something they just grow out of?
No. This raises an important question about the sustainability of these breeds. The author theorizes that these physical issues are concrete evidence that the modified traits are, quote, still not stable.
Ah, still not stable.
Right. And if we dive into the biomechanics of fish locomotion, you can clearly see why this instability creates permanent awkwardness.
Because swimming isn't just lazily paddling fins around. It's a highly complex biomechanical process.
Exactly.
I imagine it involves principles like the square cube law. Like, as the fish gets larger, its volume and mass increase exponentially faster than the cross-sectional area of its muscles and bones.
You hit the nail on the head. That is exactly the biomechanical trap these breeders have fallen into.
Yeah.
The physics of water resistance, drag, and mass, they do not scale linearly. The sequential contraction of muscle segments, the myomeres pulling against a flexible spine, has to be perfectly calibrated.
Right.
So when you selectively breed a fish to be massively larger than its natural blueprint dictates, you alter its mass and its drag coefficient dramatically.
But the internal mechanics, they haven't caught up to the new exterior size.
Right. If the neurological coordination, the muscle density, and the volume of that crucial swim bladder we talked about earlier,
Yep.
if all of that does not scale perfectly in sync with the new massive skeletal structure, the fish physically cannot swim correctly. Its movement is awkward because the animal is literally fighting against its own new disproportionate mass.
Wow. So it cannot compute its own size in the water.
Exactly.
The biological software is still sending instructions for a naturally small, slim fish, but it's trapped inside this massive, uncoordinated, glitchy hardware. That sounds incredibly exhausting for the animal.
It is. And this brings up the ethics embedded in these breeding practices, which Eng's observations bring right to the surface.
Right.
If an animal is experiencing bodily deformation and cannot achieve natural fluid movement, we are looking at a scenario where the pursuit of a giant aesthetic directly results in the loss of functional mobility.
Which forces us to really look at the blueprint itself. Like, how exactly did breeders hack the genetics to produce this XL gourami in the first place?
It's a bit of a genetic mystery.
Yeah, Eng looks at this struggling giant fish and tries to reverse engineer the biological recipe.
The text actually lays out two distinct genetic pathways that breeders might have taken to create this XL variety.
Okay.
Both pathways represent really aggressive human intervention, and both carry significant biological risks.
It's the first one.
The first pathway Eng suggests is crossbreeding.
Okay, so taking the Pearl Gourami and introducing the genetics of a naturally larger, entirely different species to hijack that size trait while attempting to retain the signature pearl-like spots.
Exactly.
But, as anyone familiar with polygenic traits knows, you can't just isolate a complex trait like massive size without bringing along a chaotic mix of other genetic instructions.
Right, it's never that simple.
Huh.
The biological reality of crossbreeding two distinct species is that you are forcing two entirely different evolutionary blueprints to merge. It is not a clean copy and paste.
Yeah.
You might successfully inherit the larger skeletal structure of the giant parent species, but due to what geneticists call linkage drag, you might simultaneously inherit the smaller organ capacity or the specific muscle attachment points of the Pearl Gourami.
Wow. So the traits conflict at a cellular level.
Exactly.
You end up with a biological Frankenstein where the joints don't align perfectly, the center of gravity is way off, and the muscle attachments are pulling at the wrong angles.
It's a mess.
That genetic mismatch perfectly explains the severe bodily deformation and awkward movement Eng witnessed. It's basically genetic instability playing out in real time in the water.
That is exactly the kind of structural instability Eng warns about. But, that is only the first possibility.
Right, there was a second pathway.
Yes. The second pathway Eng presents is selective mutation.
Meaning?
This means avoiding the crossbreeding entirely, keeping it within the exact same species, but selectively breeding the absolute largest individual Pearl Gouramis over several generations to artificially amplify that specific size mutation.
Okay. And Eng anchors this second theory with a pretty brilliant real-world comparison in the text, which is the giant betta.
Right, a very famous example in the fish world.
Because the giant betta wasn't a crossbreed. It was the result of isolating a naturally occurring size mutation within betta splendens and just aggressively line breeding for it.
Yes.
So Eng suspects the breeders of this new XL gourami might be trying to run that exact same giant betta playbook.
And while the selective mutation route avoids the biological chaos of mixing two different species blueprints, it introduces its own profound set of physiological dangers.
Like what?
Well, when you aggressively inbreed or line breed for a single extreme trait like massive size, you invariably create a genetic bottleneck. You severely limit the gene pool.
Oh, right. And when you limit the gene pool, you end up amplifying recessive, harmful mutations right alongside the desired size trait. It's the classic inbreeding depression scenario.
Precisely. So even if the genome isn't clashing with a foreign species, the rapid force scaling still causes the biological hardware to fail.
It just can't keep up.
Right. The skeletal density might not evolve fast enough to support the new, heavier mass. The cardiovascular system might not scale up enough to pump blood efficiently through the much larger body.
That makes total sense.
Whether the pathway was crossbreeding or selective mutation, the end result sitting in front of Ang is a fundamentally compromised organism.
So what does this all mean? If we pull all these threads together, Ang delivers a pretty definitive cautionary thesis on the future of these extreme varieties.
They certainly do.
The text concludes that unless breeders can somehow develop genetic traits that are both stable and healthy, these novelties, whether we are talking about the compressed balloon shape or the expanded XL giant, they are doomed to run into numerous long-term issues.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is really the biological debt coming due.
The biological debt.
Yeah. You can force a genetic shortcut to get a giant fish or a spherical fish for the market today. You can bypass the slow, stabilizing process of natural selection. But if the internal mechanics are compromised, if the organs are crushed or the musculature cannot support the skeleton, the organism pays the interest on that biological debt over its entire lifespan.
The visual novelty really masks a fragile foundation. And that thesis from Ang is exactly why we wanted to unpack this specific deep dive for you today.
Absolutely.
Because this isn't just an isolated anecdote about an obscure aquarium fish from a 2026 blog post. This exact dynamic, prioritizing aesthetic novelty over structural stability, it plays out across our entire engineered world.
We see the exact same biological consequences in agriculture, right? Like when crops are engineered for massive yields, but they entirely lose their natural drought resistance.
Oh, that's a great example.
We see it vividly when certain companion animals like dogs are selectively bred for intensely flattened faces, only to be saddled with lifelong, severe respiratory distress. The mechanism of human intervention is identical.
The visual novelty that catches our eye on the outside, the extreme trait that makes us pull out our wallets, is frequently masking a deeply complex and sometimes really struggling genetic reality on the inside.
It really is.
It forces a radical shift in perspective. From seeing these organisms purely as customizable aesthetic products to recognizing them as complex, intricate biomechanical systems that require intense internal harmony to actually function and thrive.
The text ultimately challenges us to look past the superficial, market-driven appeal of a giant or balloon label and to critically consider the unseen physiological costs required to manufacture that label.
We started today with a short observation of a uniquely shaped fish in a blog post, and we ended up unpacking the heavy physical toll of human genetic intervention.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own as you navigate the world. If our ability to manipulate genetics has the power to take nature's baseline and twist it so profoundly, creating both a delightful, perfectly balanced classic and an awkward, struggling, deformed giant, at what point does the pursuit of an aesthetic cross the line from standard animal husbandry into irresponsible biological tinkering?
That's the real question.
When you look at a highly altered organism, whether it's swimming in a glass tank, growing in an agricultural field, or just sitting in your living room, are you seeing a triumph of nature's incredible adaptability, or are you merely looking at a reflection of human vanity?
It is a critical lens to apply every single time we encounter the new and improved versions of the natural world.
Keep asking those hard questions, keep looking past the surface aesthetics, and keep investigating the hidden mechanics of the world around you. We will catch you on the next deep dive.